On August 24th, 2015, Scott Cawthon made a Steam post that would cement FNAF 4 as the largest unsolved mystery in the franchise for more than a decade. In this post, he notes that unlike the previous 3 games, nobody had put together all the pieces of the story, and as such, he would not open the ever-mysterious box at the end of the game. But even though the box was never opened, that doesn't mean that FNAF 4 hasn't been solved by now. As Scott revealed in his second interview with Dawko on August 4th, 2024, the franchise has gone in a different direction now, and so the contents of the box, if they were ever fleshed out, had now changed. And I do think that the fanbase has finally put together what FNAF 4 was, and what explanations Scott might have been expecting us to have come up with. While Sister Location in the books, especially the novel trilogy and Didophobia, implied that the game was actually some kind of fear experiment by William Afton using sound delusion discs or nightmare gas, there was no way we could have known that at the time, back when the sci-fi elements were far less pronounced. No, I believe that the truth back then was much simpler, but we were too blinded by the early theories and red herrings to see it. So allow me to recount what the consensus was back in 2015, and the 3 modern theories that may have opened the box had they been uncovered years earlier. On the surface, FNAF 4 doesn't seem too complicated. You play as a crying child known by the fandom as, well, the crying child, or alternatively the bite victim. This child seems terrified of the animatronics, and his brother loves bullying him by scaring him with a foxy mask. The crying child is accompanied by a strange plush or imaginary friend, whose seemingly supernatural nature led to MatPat affectionately dubbing him Psychic Friend Fredbear.
He's here, he's there, he's everywhere. Who are you gonna call? Psychic Friend Fredbear.
Psychic Friend Fredbear implies that the crying child has witnessed something terrible. No, don't you remember what you saw? You know what will happen if he catches you. What exactly the child saw is unclear to this day. However, shortly after FNAF 4's release, Scott released 3 hints, the other 2 of which we will come back to later. What is seen in the shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child. A hidden scene allows us to witness the purple guy, who we knew at the time as a murderous Fazbear employee, helping another employee into a suit. The main consensus then and now is that the crying child misinterpreted this benign action as the killer stuffing a body into one of the suits, something that was a playground rumor even then. After suffering for 5 days, the crying child is accidentally killed at his own birthday party by his brother and the other bullies in the jaws of the Fredbear animatronic, after they suggested that he give him a kiss. While the marketing leading up to this game and a certain infamous Markiplier clip may lead one to believe that this was the mysterious Bite of 87, an image of the Fredbear and Friends TV show reveals this to actually be the heretofore unmentioned Bite of 83, something Scott was quick to point out when MatPat fell for the red herring. From there, the rest seems simple. The actual nighttime gameplay is a coma nightmare in the mind of the dying bite victim, as enforced by the flowers, pills, and IV scan that can occasionally appear by the bed. These monstrous animatronics are the fearful reflections that the poor child saw the animatronics, or perhaps the bullies, as. Fredbear takes over the rest of the animatronics because he has ultimately led to the bite victim's death, and he is replaced by Nightmare, a seeming embodiment of death itself with a visible brain to hammer home the fatal injury. So that doesn't seem so complicated, right? And yet, there was one nagging thread that threatened to unravel the whole story. The year. 1983 was way too early. How could the crying child imagine Plushtrap to look like Springtrap, who wouldn't exist for several decades? This seemed to predate any of the murders, so why did Psychic Friend Fredbear seem to be a ghost? And why would Scott Cawthon explicitly ask, in the FNAF 4 minigame, why would the tiny toy Chica be missing her beak? And then say, 4 games, 1 story. That was something that the physical animatronic didn't do until FNAF 2 in 1987. This resulted in MatPat creating one of the most infamous theories in all of FNAF, Dream Theory. Dream Theory postulates that none of the previous 3 games had happened. They were all dreams in the dying mind of the bite victim, pieced together from the things he remembered. This one kid looks like Balloon Boy, so Balloon Boy must have been inspired by the memory of him. Toy Chica's beak falls off because the toy models did. Mangle was based on this boy in one of the rooms in the crying child's house. Springtrap was based on the finger trap, plush trap, and so on. Naturally, this "it was all a dream" theory was hated in its time, and even poked fun at in the movie. But there's this idea in the fanbase that Dream Theory was the truth at the time, but has since changed to avoid backlash. While I find that unlikely, the strange inconsistencies that led to Dream Theory were indeed meant as clues, but for an entirely different conclusion that we'll come back to, that I like to call reverse Dream Theory. It's funny, because even without Dream Theory, our consensus on FNAF 4 was entirely wrong. The first and most well-known flaw in our old understanding of the game was on the identity of our protagonist. It was all too easy to assume that we played as the same character in the minigames and the night sections, even though that hadn't been the case in any of the previous games. After all, the crying child is terrified of the animatronics, so it was only logical that these were his nightmares. The dreamer also appears to be very short, and even the Steam page for the game mentions that we play as a child whose role is yet unknown. Of course, just because the dream was from the point of view of a child, doesn't mean that the dreamer is still a child. It is now believed that the nightmares actually take place in the mind of the crying child's brother, Michael Afton. And this theory, MikeDreamer, is one of the 3 pieces that I think would have solved the puzzle back then. Michael seems to be the protagonist of every mainline FNAF game, donning the pseudonyms Michael Schmidt and Fritz Smith in FNAF 1 and 2, who were fired for the exact same reasons, hunting his father in FNAF 3 and 6, and named explicitly in Sister Location. The primary evidence for MikeDreamer comes from the security logbook, where Michael draws Nightmare Fredbear on a page asking about his recent dreams. This actually indicates that Mike is having these dreams around the time of FNAF 1, based on when he had this book, which explains why the animatronics behave so similarly in those games, and why a reversed phone call from FNAF 1 can be heard in some of the FNAF 4 ambience. Many people have called this a retcon, an effort to tie Mike and the Afton family into everything. While I don't think that this was planned out back in FNAF 1, I do think it was conceptualized by the time of FNAF 4. The presence of the phone call was already suspicious, but I think the simplest piece of evidence is the layout of the bedroom. We get to see exactly what the crying child's room looks like in the minigames, and it looks nothing like the room that we play in. This was enough for me to theorize that we played as the brother, having guilt-induced nightmares of when he had put his brother through back when I was a teen, when this game first came out. Even if you want to say that it's just a fake experiment room, and that's why it looks different, it would have been impossible to predict that. There's also a somewhat dubious quote that Scott allegedly made in addition to those other 3 hints during the Game Theory livestream, asking, "Have you thought about who the security guard is?" This one is unverified, but if it was a faker, they made a shockingly good point. I also think that it was reasonable to assume that the murderous Purple Man, who we would later know as William Afton, was the father of Michael and the crying child. There were very few human characters back then. The purple guy has a cameo, his identity was a hot point of discussion, and there was seemingly no reason to focus on the home life of these seemingly random characters otherwise. Indeed, it was a popular, if heavily criticized theory at the time that has since been proven correct. Sister Location would later tie the family together even more, implying that psychic friend Fredbear was little more than a walkie-talkie for William to keep an eye on his child. But I think there's more to it than that. It has glowing white pupils and is called Possessed Fredbear Plush in the merchandise, so I do believe there was a ghost behind that mask. This brings me to the next of the 3 key theories, GoldenDuo, also known as Golden Both, which stipulates that Golden Freddy is possessed by both the crying child and one of the 5 victims of the missing children's incident. This theory explains how there can be 5 dead children for the 5 animatronics, but also explains what happened to the crying child in a more satisfying way than something like Shatter Victim. Although Fredbear didn't immediately kill the bite victim, bits of the poor kid's brain were left in Fredbear's jaws. Later media would portray the bite victim's memories as scattered, and William or psychic friend Fredbear state that the bite victim needs to be put back together. So it's not unreasonable to imagine that the child was left comatose because his soul, or at least a part of it, had already lodged itself inside of Fredbear. Golden Freddy even tells Mike, who would be his brother, "It's me," in FNAF 1. This suit would later have a different child's body stuffed into it by William. A major point of evidence for GoldenDuo is that security logbook. In addition to Mike's entries, there seems to be a spirit possessing it, asking questions of some other spirit, who alters the text in response. A cipher in the book seems to reveal the asker's name as Cassidy, which is bolstered by the use of the name in the novel trilogy for a different spirit. Cassidy, who most people believe to be the vengeful spirit inside of Golden Freddy, who traps William in Ultimate Custom Night, seems to be trying to help the other spirit remember details about themselves, but they're scared and can't see anything. GoldenDuo rose to popularity with the release of the Fazbear Frights books and their Stitch Wraith Stinger epilogues. The Stitch Wraith is an animatronic possessed by 2 children, Jake, a sweet boy who dies of a brain tumor, a head injury, and Andrew, a vengeful boy murdered by Afton out for revenge, who can't see through the animatronic's eyes. This seems to be a parallel for Golden Freddy's situation. This also prompts people to notice that Golden Freddy is the only animatronic with 2 lights behind their eyes during the FNAF 3 bad ending scream, although this could just be a lighting artifact. When FNAF 4 came out, people were split about whether the crying child would go on to possess Golden Freddy or the puppet. Personally, I was a puppet believer back in the day, before we knew it to be possessed by Charlie Emily, Maybe the puppet was in the FNAF 4 box, like the box that comes out in FNAF 2. The bite victim heavily resembles the puppet, with his tear stains and striped shirt, and especially this pose. And we knew that the puppet was the first victim, which would fit this game being the earliest in the timeline. But that was the problem. We'd seen how the puppet was killed, and it was not like this. But if the crying child was Golden Freddy, then who was Psychic Friend Fredbear? The puppet? That wouldn't make much sense. But that begs the question. Who is Psychic Friend Fredbear? A mere walkie-talkie? I think that this is the last piece of the puzzle, and one that isn't as widely accepted today. I submit to you that Psychic Friend Fredbear is none other than Cassidy, the other spirit in Golden Freddy. Of course, that raises a massive problem. Cassidy and the other children weren't killed until 1985, so how could she be speaking to the crying child back in 1983? Well, just like how the nightmares take place decades later, I believe that the Between Night minigames are also taking place long after 1983. I know how that sounds. The TV and Williams' code and sister location make it pretty clear that these events are happening in 1983. But that doesn't mean we're experiencing them live. I think that the crying child is reliving the week leading up to his death, over and over again. LoopVictim was formerly posited by the YouTube channel FNAFology only a year ago, but I hadn't actually seen their video when I thought of this. My inspiration actually came from an amazing animation of the Bite of 83 by Jackian, which you should all check out. But the more I thought about it, the more the pieces clicked into place. FNAF World, released shortly after FNAF 4, features a glitched Fredbear, who is very likely to be Psychic Friend Fredbear. Fredbear gives us instructions that parallel the FNAF 3 minigames, seemingly setting up the happiest day, an event that mirrors the crying child's birthday party and gives peace to a spirit wearing Golden Freddy's mask. Fredbear says that we are leaving breadcrumbs for him. I used to believe that this could be the puppet, since it was a major player in Happiest Day, but this mirrors how Cassidy in the logbook seems to try to help the crying child remember. Cassidy is obviously more associated with Fredbear, and she would be linked to the crying child by their shared vessel. This theory is apparently called Cassidy Plush Alter M. This is how Cassidy can be Psychic Friend Fredbear, even though she died after the crying child. She's entered into the loop to try to break him out of it, leaving inconsistencies as breadcrumbs. People have tried to explain things, like how the tiny Toy Chica's beak can be connected to the real Toy Chica years later with things like dream theory, or convoluted ideas like God David / memory victim that speculate that the crying child's memories are influencing the rest of the world. But wouldn't it make more sense if the rest of the world is filling with the crying child's memory loop? The tiny Toy Chica isn't influencing the real one. This inconsistency was introduced by Cassidy to get the crying child's attention. Or perhaps it was merely something that they passively noticed in the decades after their deaths, like how your alarm clock can incorporate itself into your dream before it wakes you up. LoopVictim has not yet reached mainstream popularity, but there's one detail that I haven't seen anyone else mention that really cements this for me. While everyone focused on didophobia as a FNAF 4 explanation through fear gas experiments, I think we overlooked a different story from that book, Alone Together. This story features a ghost who is unknowingly reliving the days leading up to his death in a loop, which is only broken when he finally discovers his body. Right Host has frequently referenced this story, but only in the context of the importance of a ghost discovering their body. But this sets a very strong precedent that ghosts can be caught in a loop of their final week. I think this is exactly what has happened to the crying child. I believe that, had we come to the consensus that the nights were dreamt by the bully brother, the crying child would go on to possess Golden Freddy alongside the MCI victim, and that the Between Night minigames were a loop from a child that had already died, that we would have solved FNAF 4. While the first 2 points were reasonable, LoopVictim simply did not have enough evidence at the time. Looking back, there were certainly clues. The first minigame mentions that the brother locked you in your room again, that he's hiding again. We assumed that this was just a brother that endured bullying for years, but he was actually facing the memory of the same bullying over and over again. So, what was in the box? Frankly, I don't know. And I think it's probably too late to ever know now. But now that the pieces have fallen into place, I think we can finally let FNAF 4 rest.